How's it going, guys? This is Criptobud here for today. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the current market slump that we're having once again, and talking a little bit about some of the price action that's been happening along with some news that you may be interested in. Now, in the last video, I was talking a little bit about possible market manipulation. A lot of you guys mentioned that definitely this market's manipulated. We did talk about some of the possibilities of people entering short positions just to driving the price lower to profit from the downside. Today, we're going to ask the other question is, how does the end of a bear market actually work? And so, for those of you who have not been in finance or investing and never experienced a true bear market in other asset classes, I'll be going ahead and kind of run you through some of the things I've seen. Now, with all things, prices will come back up. I mean, nothing goes down in a straight line and nothing goes up in a straight line. So the first thing I want to emphasize is two things. The first thing happening with Ether right now, and the second thing happening with Bitcoin. The rest of the altcoins, I'm just going to assume that they are basically going to follow Bitcoin and Ether. So there's no point talking about projects or any ICOs or any of that, because until these two leaders begin to hold their footing, I think at this point we're probably going to assume that the path of least resistance is down for all the ERC20 tokens, and even also the Net5 tokens that are on the NEO platform. So let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin first. So in the last video, I was really kind of mentioning something about this range that we've been stuck in. And so what's really interesting right now is that Bitcoin is actually continuing to carve a bottom here at that 6,200 level. Now, we basically are touching upon this 5,800 level for multiple times already. In fact, I expect this level to continue to grind out as Bitcoin looks at this specifically, this pattern here. Now, a couple of things are catching my attention. Now, there's the first school of thought. One is that as more of this price begins to touch this bottom, that there's a likelihood that it will break down. And in the past, that actually has occurred in other markets where you do get the bottoming out action, but you do get that ending, that area where it just continues to touch. And at some point, if it keeps on hovering that area, we do get that massive break. So the longer we kind of hang around this area, this 68, 5,800, 6,000 range, the higher the probability of it kind of cracking at some point. Now, also the other probability is going to be that we're just going to have a long, drawn-out bottoming out. I can rule out right now a V-bottom. Normally, what you end up getting with V-bottoms is basically a flush down and then all of a sudden a takeoff. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them being the sentiment is just not there. People are just at this point not interested in crypto anymore. We don't have that new money coming in. So for us to sustain a V-bottom rebound, it would take massive amount of money pouring in out of nowhere and reversing the entire sentiment. So I just don't see that right now. The other option is what I call a double bottom. The double bottom that we're seeing right here is 1 and 2, but we've already established 2 more bottoms here, and it remains to be seen whether the current bottom that you're seeing right here in September is going to hold. So that, I would say, kind of rules that one out. So we're left with the only type of bottom left, which is going to be what I call the flat bottom, the one where you basically get no action for a very long period of time, and then the price kind of rebounds. We already seen that before back here early after the last boom and bust cycle, where the price really did not. Let me change this to a log chart, where you can kind of see this bottoming out action back in 2015. And for those of you guys who were there in 2015, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was an area where it was just really boring. In fact, that was probably the best time to accumulate Bitcoin, when it was trading at about 200 to 180 bucks. And you can kind of see that idea of that breakdown pattern no longer hold true, because we at that time, and let me just zoom in for you, you can kind of see that we did have back in 2015, it took a full year before the market really recovered. And in fact, if I just remove this real carefully, you can kind of see that. You can see that we did have multiple bottoms as well. And so that's what I'm really looking for Bitcoin. And so far I'm seeing that. And that's why I'm getting very bullish on Bitcoin on a longer time frame, because we did end up on that daily chart, that triple bottom, and along with that massive sell-off that we saw back here, about $177. So it wasn't a complete sideways action. It took a while for Bitcoin to consistently make that move. So best case scenario, what we're looking for is, 1 full year of this. Obviously, I think we may end up getting a little longer just because the move was a lot more violent on the way up. And so I think we're getting very close to that. So this is the area I'm looking for. And that last bottoming out action, you ended up back in November of 15. So if you take a look at the timeline carefully, and we're looking at 2015 as being the end of that bear market, and the run started really in November of 15 with definitely its ebbs and flows, leading up to 16 and 17, and definitely the climax in 18, then it becomes very obvious that this could be a repeat of that, with the exception here that we actually are having, you can kind of remove this bottom, something around this line, around this 5,800 level, which on the logarithmic chart makes perfect sense. So all I'm doing right here is waiting for this third bottom here to kind of flush itself out. And if the market has any sort of historical semblance, then there should be some sort of move moving forward. Now, if you remember the market back in 2015, it was almost very similar to what we're having right now. You had that massive move, the blowout, and then all of a sudden just people were not interested, and all of a sudden we had this slow kind of grind back up. And so had you basically bought around 2015 for Bitcoin at about $260, and I clearly remember this because the market had just collapsed and people were talking about, see, I told you so, Bitcoin is dead, then you would have made massive amounts of money, because that basically would have put you at a 100x from that $200 price range. But you would have had to have held it for about 2 years for that portion to actually work. So I have a feeling we're definitely getting somewhere around that line. Now, again, if this last bottom here does not hold, then yes, we're definitely going to have some major problems, because this is usually the type of sentiment that I'm getting. So again, based off the experiences. Now, in regards to the overall, I would say, crypto ERC20 market, that's a whole different animal, because right now there's this whole narrative that says that the ERC20, that the ICOs are dumping their ETH. And actually, I'm going to challenge that a little bit. I don't believe they are selling their ETH. There's actually data that indicates otherwise, and I'm tracking their main wallets to figure that out. So people who are spewing out stuff that's saying, oh, the ICOs are selling, there could be some truth into it, but I wouldn't say it's the only reason for it. The real reason is that there is no demand right now for ETH. And I don't think it's an issue with supply being unloaded onto the market. I think it's the issue of the lack of demand for it. And so, we'll talk. I'm going to talk about ETH here real quick. But one thing I'm seeing about Ethereum is that it definitely on the actual price pattern itself, it definitely has the very, very common pattern that I saw a couple of months back on something like Ontology, where the price just continues to fall over, and it's definitely this inverted kind of bowl that we call it. I'd call it the inverted bowl, but I guess you want to call it distribution, you want to call it whatever you want to call it, where basically the market just begins to really sell off. Now, the good news is that there is definitely an oversold environment here. So I'm talking a little bit about that in my group, about how we're kind of playing ETH a little bit. But I'm going to take I'm disagreeing with a lot of what's being said right now, just because I do think that ETH has something very, very valuable to offer that a lot of people are just not paying attention to. But that's on another story, another comment. Anyway, overall market, I do expect Bitcoin here to regain its dominance at some point. Right now we're sitting at about 55-56% dominance. I expect the dominance to go up to about 66-67, which was the last high we had back around April, I believe. And so I do believe these markets tend to kind of repeat themselves on some level. So if we get to that market dominance of that 60%, possibly 70% range, I think definitely there's going to be a very, very strong move for Bitcoin at that point, in which case we probably are going to end this sort of bottoming out period, and we're probably going to establish a new trend. So at this point, it's just a no trade zone. It's a no trade zone. I'm just looking at where exactly Bitcoin can go, and definitely watching out for those levels. So, you know, it's basically hanging in there. I think there are times when, you know, we go in and like all in or whatnot, but this is not the time. And there is again that risk that you're taking by opening up large positions at these levels. But like with any sort of market cycle, back when I was looking at the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 in 2000, it took a while for this market to really digest that parabolic move. And so what we're seeing right here with Bitcoin is something very, very constructive. In fact, I think this is probably the most constructive price action we've seen in months for Bitcoin. And that's why I'm very, very hopeful moving into the fourth quarter, because my focus will be on Bitcoin and will be focused on some of these higher quality projects. But I would say that about 90 or 80% of these are I'm not even touching anymore, just because of some of the major problems they have right now with usability, and also with honoring their roadmap and the money that they took from the community to do these projects. And so I hope you do your own research when you're looking at where to put your newfound money, especially when the crypto market picks up, because there will be a turnaround time. Now, whether that's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, it just remains to be seen. There's no way to value that. I just don't think that this is the end of it. But this is actually the time to take a look at some of the longer implications for not just price, but also the technology, what's happening in the development community, like, for example, with Ether and with Bitcoin and so with Litecoin, some of these other projects that have been here for a very long time. All right, guys, CryptoBuddy, have a great day.